Rieu, the smiling king of waltz we all thought had the dream life, was actually living a double life for almost 30 years. While he dazzled crowds and outsold megastars like Beyoncé, behind the scenes he was drowning in pressure, hiding a crushing €34 million debt, a ruthless empire spiraling out of control, and a secret health crisis that nearly wiped everything out. He kept it all hidden behind that signature charm. Trust me, you're going to want to stay till the very end, because what finally pushed him to reveal the truth will shock you. The public image versus private reality. Every night across the world, audiences reportedly watch the same magical scene unfold. Rieu, violin lifted high, smiling with that familiar warmth that seemed to light up entire stadiums as he guided the Johann Strauss Orchestra with effortless charm. People always said it looked as though he was floating through the music, and that infectious joy had turned him into one of the most recognizable faces in classical entertainment. On stage, he appeared to have everything anyone in the music world could dream of: the castle in Maastricht, the non-stop touring, the global admiration, and the fans who would cross oceans just to experience the spectacle he created. His concerts consistently sold out in Europe, South America, the United States, even across China, and the man managed to sell more than 40 million CDs and DVDs, outperforming rock icons like AC/DC, Bruce Springsteen, and Coldplay. When asked how he created this magical atmosphere, Rieu reportedly said that people didn't just come for the music. They came for the happiness everyone shared together. It was this joy, the laughter, the dancing in the aisles, the tears, and what he once described as small miracles of human connection that made his concerts feel less like formal classical events and more like warm, welcoming celebrations. It was no surprise the New York Times labeled him Maestro of the Masses, while the Spectator famously called him a weapon of mass happiness. But behind that big glowing smile that people loved so much, there was another reality that few ever even guessed. Behind the scenes, he reportedly lived with enormous emotional and financial pressure, the kind that could crush someone who didn't love what he did. His orchestra wasn't just a group of musicians. It was a giant livelihood he felt personally responsible for. Around 120 permanent employees depended on him. The orchestra members, the choir, the costume designers, administrative staff, the technical crew, and dozens of people who made his world-class productions possible. Running this musical empire cost him around €1 million every single month, whether concert happened or not. And when the COVID-19 pandemic shut the world down, that responsibility didn't pause. Salaries still had to be paid. People still needed to feed their families. Rieu later admitted he even thought about selling his priceless 1732 Stradivari violin, an instrument worth millions, just to keep paying his musical family. He reportedly said he knew he could find another violin someday, but he could never replace the orchestra he had built over decades. Many of his musicians had been with him for 20 or 30 years, and he talked about them not as employees, but as family. The world never realized that behind the glittering stages and fireworks, he was quietly fighting to prevent his life's work from collapsing. This wasn't his first time walking through fire either. In 2010, long before the pandemic, he confessed that he had once fallen into €34 million in debt after building a full-scale touring replica of Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace. It was one of the most extravagant productions ever attempted. Fountains, dancers wearing handmade gowns costing thousands, and even a golden carriage. Audiences saw magic, but they never saw the bills piling up or the sleepless nights that followed. He carried that burden alone, facing the terrifying possibility that all he had built could disappear. Yet somehow, he kept performing night after night, as if none of it touched him. How many people sitting in those audiences realized that while he played the Blue Danube Waltz with a radiant smile, he was also quietly calculating whether he could still afford to pay everyone the following week? To the world, he looked like a king of classical music. Off stage, he was a man living in fear of financial collapse. People often assumed his success came easily, and Rieu once remarked that he sensed a lot of jealousy around him. He said people would comment, "Oh my God, he plays waltzes and the money just comes in," as if the life he built were effortless. But he always explained that behind the glamour was relentless work. A friend once told him, "You're not lucky. You work so hard that you make the luck happen." And he said those words captured the truth better than anything. He repeated that success was not handed to him. It was carved out of decades of practice, planning, touring, and carrying responsibility that most people would never want. And so, while audiences believed they were watching a man who lived inside a fairy tale, what they were really seeing was a master of something far more difficult: compartmentalization. On stage, he radiated pure joy, lifting spirits and making millions feel like life was lighter, softer, more beautiful. Off stage, he often walked into meetings filled with financial fear, stress, and the pressure of supporting the livelihoods of hundreds of people. And perhaps the real question lingering underneath it all was this: how long can someone hide a truth that's slowly reshaping their entire life? He learned to tuck every worry so far into background that not even his closest fans could sense the weight he carried. But behind the charm and the spotlight, something far deeper was unfolding, something he never intended the world to see. Stay with me till the very end, because this is where the origins of the double life truly begin. The origins of the double life, the story of Andre Rieu's control-driven musical empire, reportedly began long before his global fame turned him into the world's most recognizable violinist. Anyone looking closely at his early career would supposedly see a striking paradox. The same perfectionism that made his performances unforgettable also forced him to build a life that was carefully divided, almost as if he needed two worlds to survive the pressure he placed on himself. In the 1970s, he performed with various small ensembles, including the Maastricht Symphony Orchestra, and he quickly recognized what he described as troubling gaps between traditional classical music and everyday people. It was said that this realization planted the seed of a different dream inside him, a vision that would require total control, because how else could he reshape something as rigid as classical music? He openly admitted, in his own words, that he was a control freak, adding that he had to be strict and that he could not be any other way. That attitude became his signature as he formed the Maastricht Salon Orchestra in 1978, a small group of 12 musicians who played in modest, often overlooked places like restaurants, weddings, and community events. He recalled how people would ignore them in those early days, and yet those forgotten performances reportedly became his training ground for something much larger. During those times, he learned skills most musicians never touched: managing people, coordinating schedules, understanding finances, and keeping every moving piece aligned. He explained that he had knowledge about all sorts of things, and that people respected this because they knew he would always check every detail later. Was it surprising, then, that his concerts eventually transformed into joyful spectacles filled with precision, emotion, humor, and celebration? According to many accounts, that transformation was no accident. It was a product of obsessive attention to detail, a vision that demanded complete authority over every element of the experience, from lighting and choreography to arrangements and timing. But maintaining such an intense artistic world reportedly required an equally strong foundation in his private life, and that foundation appeared in 1975 when he married Marjorie Coleman, a language instructor who became far more than a partner. She reportedly stepped in as the quiet strategist behind much of his success, the person who kept his artistic ambitions tethered to practical reality. Many accounts stated that Andre openly admitted he could not operate the orchestra without her involvement. Together, they built a family-centered business model that blended creativity with careful planning, each balancing the other in a way that made the entire structure stable. He insisted many times that fame existed only in the minds of other people and not in his. He reportedly said that he was the same person whether he was on stage, in his garden, or standing in a shop buying sugar. This idea of staying grounded became one of the tools that helped him keep his double life in place, maintaining the joyful entertainer in public while protecting the more complicated, intensely driven person behind closed doors. Interestingly, the difficulties of those early years almost pushed him toward a completely different future. He reportedly confessed that there was a time when he wanted to put away his violin for good. In fact, he and Marjorie were so close to giving up that they even designed menu cards for a pizza restaurant they wanted to open. Their most expensive dish would have been something called Pizza Paganini, a playful menu item where Rieu himself would supposedly walk out of the kitchen and play for customers at their tables. It almost sounded unbelievable that the man who would later sell out stadiums once stood at the edge of giving up music entirely. Behind his relentless perfectionism, however, lay deeply emotional roots. He spoke openly about his childhood, saying his parents were very severe and that they did not love him very much. He believed he had been a happy boy from birth, and he thought that might have been the problem. His happiness seemed to clash with the complicated emotional world of his parents. He wondered aloud whether they were jealous or simply unable to cope with a child who radiated joy. Could those early wounds have shaped his need for control later in life? Many people close to him seemed to think so. Perhaps creating an orchestra where he could design his own world was a way of building the safety and acceptance he never received in his youth. As his career expanded, his drive for perfection only grew more intense. Those around him observed how he lived in two modes at once: the gentle, smiling performer adored by audiences and the sharp, meticulous architect running a massive operation behind the scenes. Maintaining those roles reportedly required constant mental balance and the ability to switch identities depending on the moment. The strain eventually caught up with him physically. He admitted that he suffered health problems, including a frightening loss of coordination that forced him to slow down and rethink his schedule. He said that this phase was thankfully in the past, but the experience taught him that even the most disciplined perfectionists must eventually adjust to protect their health. Through all these years, he was quietly laying the structural beams of his double life. On one side, the warm, joyful entertainer who appeared effortless and free, and on the other, the tireless perfectionist who carried heavy responsibilities, made all final decisions, and ensured nothing ever slipped through the cracks. And perhaps the real question lingering underneath it all was this: how does someone carry a world on their shoulders without ever letting it show? This carefully constructed separation, built slowly and deliberately over decades, became the unseen engine behind his global success, an invisible framework that allowed him to spread joy to millions, while quietly managing the crushing pressures that came with building a musical empire shaped entirely by his vision. Every note, every performance, every smile he shared was backed by discipline, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief that beauty had to be crafted, controlled, and fiercely protected. And trust me, when you discover the secrets he carried for 30 years, you want to stay with this story till the very end. Secrets he carried for 30 years behind the ornate concert halls, the golden lights, and the loyal crowds who adored him. Andre Rieu reportedly carried a weight that very few people ever imagined, a kind of silent burden that followed him from city to city, even as he smiled and led his orchestra with effortless charm. For over 30 years, he managed to keep a firm wall between his public triumphs and his private struggles, holding together a world that looked flawless from the outside, but was quietly held together by threads of fear, pressure, and unbelievable responsibility. He once admitted that the financial collapse of 2008 nearly broke him, a moment when everything he had built stood on the edge of ruin. At the time, his fame was skyrocketing. His concerts were selling out, his brand was flourishing, and fans saw him as a symbol of elegance and stability. But behind that image, he was slipping into a financial nightmare caused by a single, overly ambitious project, a life-size recreation of Vienna's Schönbrunn Palace that cost far more than he ever expected. He described it as having overreached myself with a huge, stupid production, and revealed that the mistake left him minus 35 million euros, a number so massive that he reportedly spent a week fearing he would lose everything he owned. He spoke of lying awake at night, thinking he might lose the castle, the orchestra, and the life he had worked so hard to build. And yet, he still went out on stage every night, smiling with the same warmth audiences recognized, performing through the anxiety while drowning in worry. Then, almost miraculously, his next world tour became a massive success, thanks mostly to word of mouth. He recalled how, after a single year, he had not only paid back the enormous debt, but ended up 20 million in profit. It sounded almost impossible, but it became one of the rare times fortune turned in his favor. Even with that financial recovery, another enormous responsibility weighed on him every single month: the lives and livelihoods of the 120 people who depended on him. Rieu explained that he needed $1 million a month only to pay everybody, and that was without touring. When they were on the road, costs rose even higher. The orchestra was not just a musical group. It was a massive operation of 110 people on my payroll and another 100 working on a freelance base. Anyone else might have found such numbers crushing, but he kept moving, though he admitted the pressure never truly stopped. How could someone sleep peacefully knowing that so many families relied on them? How could anyone carry that kind of weight without feeling it press into their bones? This was the part of his life few saw, the part hidden behind the glamour of waltzes and elegant shows. Then came 2020, and with it a challenge that shook him far deeper than even the collapse of 2008. When the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the world, the one thing that kept his entire musical family alive, touring, disappeared. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, he faced a decision so painful he could barely speak about it. He admitted that he was ready to sell his beloved Stradivarius violin, a priceless instrument from 1732, because he refused to let go of a single member of his orchestra. He said he would rather sell my Stradivarius to cover a few more months than fire a member of my orchestra, and he meant it completely. He even explained that although the violin was priceless to him, he could always get another instrument, but he could never replace such a wonderful orchestra. What kind of leader makes a sacrifice like that? What kind of love must he have felt for the people who played beside him every night? His words made it clear that his orchestra was not just a team, it was his extended family. Yet, beneath all his determination, another fear lived quietly inside him. He confessed that the responsibility was sometimes a heavy burden, and he worried constantly about the future. What if he fell ill? What if something happened to him? What would become of the orchestra that had grown around his vision? During the pandemic, he watched government support decrease month after month, from 80% to 70%, then 60%, knowing it would eventually stop entirely. He explained that once the support ended, he might not be able to make it, and he believed June 2021 could be the point of no return. Imagine carrying that fear while still trying to appear calm for everyone who depended on him. For a man whose concerts were filled with joy and romance, his private thoughts were often filled with dread. But then, just when everything seemed ready to collapse, an unexpected lifeline arrived. The Netherlands granted him 10 million euros in state aid, a rescue that he said quite literally saved him. Without it, he admitted, we would not have made it. And he said he was proud, deeply proud, that he did not have to dismiss a single member of his orchestra. That pride wasn't about ego. It was about loyalty, about a promise he made long before the world shut down. And in the end, the fact that he kept that promise revealed a truth about him that very few people ever see from their seats in the audience. Behind the charming smile, behind the elegant bowing of the violin, behind the giant productions and world tours, André Rieu was a man fighting every day to protect the people who believe in him. A man who carried fear and pressure with quiet strength, who nearly lost everything more than once, and who worked tirelessly to make sure no one in his musical family ever felt abandoned. The turning point and revelation, the moment that truly reshaped the way people saw André Rieu, reportedly came in March 2024, right in the heart of Mexico City, when the carefully polished image he had spent decades building finally cracked in the most human way possible. After just 2 performances in a high-altitude city, the 74-year-old maestro collapsed under a punishing mix of jet lag, low oxygen, and a relentless flu, and those around him said it was the first time they had ever seen him that vulnerable. It wasn't his first health struggle. Back in 2010, a vestibular nerve infection had attacked his balance system so violently that he could barely stand without dizziness swallowing him whole. That condition had forced him to cancel tours then, but according to those closest to him, this Mexico episode felt different, heavier, almost like a warning. Backstage, he reportedly uttered words he had never allowed himself to say before, admitting, I don't want a first concert day like this anymore. And his son Pierre later described how frightening the scene was, his father's legs shaking uncontrollably, the fear written all over his face as he questioned whether to keep going. When does a man who has spent his entire life pretending to be invincible finally allow himself to break? After returning home, Rieu did something he had resisted for more than 30 years. He admitted the truth. He reportedly said he needed to think carefully about his body, a sentence no one ever expected from a man who had long treated exhaustion and illness as obstacles to bulldoze through. That moment of honesty triggered a shift within the family itself. Pierre stepped in with a firmer hand, reorganizing the massive touring schedule that had pushed his father beyond reasonable limits for so long. It was as if the entire machine had suddenly paused to acknowledge the one thing they had all ignored. Even legends have limits. And while tens of thousands of fans, an estimated 40,000, received refunds for the canceled Mexico shows, something surprising happened. Instead of frustration, waves of compassion poured in from around the world. People sent messages, letters, and even advice. One Australian fan reportedly sent specialized balance exercises that later became a crucial part of Ryu's recovery routine. Isn't it strange how sometimes disappointment turns into empathy when people realize that even their heroes are human? In the end, those close to him said his choice to be honest wasn't about weakness at all. It was about recognizing mortality. He openly confessed that he wanted to continue his pace until the grave, yet admitted something equally raw, that sitting at home drove him even crazier than the exhausting tours. It was confession layered with humor, fear, stubbornness, and longing all at once, the kind of truth only a man facing the weight of age can speak. For decades he had lived behind a wall of perfectionism, always presenting himself as tireless, charismatic, and untouched by strain. But this time the wall fell, and what people saw behind it wasn't a broken man, it was a real one. And isn't that sometimes more powerful than the illusion of perfection people try so hard to maintain? Ryu's openness did more than pause his tour schedule. It reminded thousands that even those who stand under bright lights with a bow in their hand and a smile on their face are still made of flesh, fatigue, fear, and fighting spirit. And perhaps the real question lingering underneath it all was this: what happens when the world finally sees the truth behind the curtain, the fragile, complicated human being who's been holding everything together for decades? In that rare moment of vulnerability, something unexpected happened. The world didn't love him any less. In fact, they loved him even more because for the first time, they saw the man behind the music, the soul behind performances, the heart behind the legend. It was a turning point that reshaped not just his reputation, but his entire story. And trust me, you'll want to watch till the very end, because this is where his legacy is completely redefined by resilience. A legacy redefined by resilience throughout his struggles. It was said that Andre Rieu's unusual blend of artistry and entrepreneurship shaped a legacy unlike anything classical music had seen before, and at 74 he was reportedly still navigating profound challenges that had once stayed hidden behind the glamour of his concerts. People around him often remarked that his so-called double life, balancing raw creativity with the stress of running a global entertainment empire, had quietly shaped the kind of musician he became. Friends shared that he often repeated a simple belief: classical music belonged to everyone. He reportedly insisted that classical music did not know boundaries or require a specific type of audience, saying it was written for all of humanity. Was that why he had been able to outsell pop stars in an age where hardly anyone bought physical albums anymore? More than 40 million CDs and DVDs sold, even in a declining market, seemed to support the idea. Those close to him explained that he believed music should go straight to the heart, that emotional connection mattered more than technical perfection. Could this be why people flocked to his concerts as if they were spiritual experiences rather than performances? Observers frequently noted that Rieu approached every show as if he were trying to speak to someone's soul, not just entertain a crowd. People who knew the family well often pointed out that behind Ryu's success stood his wife Marjorie, who was described as the quiet architect of everything he built. She had provided emotional grounding during periods of exhaustion, financial setbacks, and the pressure of running a touring orchestra the size of a small company. How many artists could say their marriage survived more than 4 decades in an industry that changed people overnight? Their sons, Pierre and Marc, had become equally vital to the operation. Pierre, who oversaw production and communications, often acted as the bridge between Ryu's artistic vision and the enormous logistics required to bring it to life. Marc supported the business from the background with the same loyalty that defined the entire household. Family members once mentioned that their unity came from understanding that his music was not just a career, but a lifelong calling. Could anyone sustain a career this intense without a support system so steady and so deeply rooted in love? When people reflected on Ryu's personal evolution, especially after his terrifying vestibular nerve infection, they often repeated a story he shared. He had made 2 lists during his recovery. One list held the things that energized him, mostly anything to do with music, and the other list held the tasks that drained him. Observers recalled him saying he decided to choose joy after that moment, a decision that sounded simple but required enormous courage. Did every artist reach a point where they had to choose between what fed their soul and what slowly chipped away at it? His experience suggested exactly that. His insistence that he was the same person on stage and off stage reflected a deeper lesson his fans often said they learned from him. Authenticity, even in the darkest moments, mattered more than perfection or polish. And then came the question everyone kept asking. What about the future of the Johann Strauss Orchestra? Those close to him said that despite health scares and the toll of constant touring, the word retirement never existed in his vocabulary. He reportedly said he would never take a break and would never stop, repeating it so passionately that people wondered if the stage itself kept him alive. At nearly 75, he was telling people that he intended to live to 140, joking that he was only halfway there. Was this exaggeration, or a glimpse into a spirit that refused to age? While he had begun considering changes such as reducing distant tours, witnesses said his passion remained unshaken. He continued planning future performances with the energy of someone decades younger, gradually bringing younger musicians into the orchestra to secure a legacy he hoped would last long after he was gone. People around him often said that watching him prepare for new tours felt like watching someone chase a dream that never stopped expanding. Those who followed his journey believed the story carried a powerful lesson. Resilience could be quiet, authentic, and completely unseen by the audience, yet could shape every note a musician played. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.